Someone commented how like we're right on time. Well, that's the nice thing about the online audience. All right, good afternoon, everyone, both in person and online. Seeing as this is the last session, then emergency exits and then washrooms if you need it. So I abbreviate this a little bit. Right? You're welcome. You're welcome. Come join me at the dinner theater, right? Roast beef. So, what a day we've had, and really looking forward to introducing our final speaker, Alison Klages. Alison received her MA from the Anthropology Department at the University of Western Ontario. Also received her certificate in museum studies from the Ontario Museum Association. Prior to her current role as curator of the Ska-Nah-Doht Village and Museum, Alison had also worked for Fanshawe Pioneer Village, London Regional Children's Museum, and the Museum of Ontario Archaeology. So I look at Alison as not just a guest speaker today, but also a colleague or an ally to us, because where she is at the Longwoods Conservation Area, and the War of 1812 reenactors really enjoy sharing that space with Alan and her facilities. So please join me in welcoming Alison.
So, perfect. So, again, my name is Alison Klages. I am the curator of Ska-Nah-Doht Village and Museum. We're located in Mount Bridges, Ontario, so just a little ways outside of London, about half-hour away, depending on the day of the week and the drive. And I'm also the team lead for communications and education for the Lower Thames Valley Conservation Authority, which is the organization where that owns and operates Ska-Nah-Doht Village and Museum. So just a little background for everybody, and before we get started, show of hands for the folks in the room. Who has been to Ska-Nah-Doht before? Good on you, good on you. For those of you who have not been, or if you're more further afield, for those who are online, Ska-Nah-Doht Village and Museum is an interactive museum that engages the public in the preservation of Indigenous heritage, particularly that of the Haudenosaunee, as we have a recreation Longhouse village here. This picture on the sepia scale is one of the first iterations of the village when it was built. And as I mentioned, we are owned and operated by the Lower Thames Valley Conservation Authority, whose jurisdiction is downstream from about Delaware to Lake St. Clair. And then there's boundaries on either side, but very, very long swath of space. It probably takes about 2 hours to drive from end to end of the jurisdiction of our conservation authority. And we are advised by a very special group of people who are on our advisory committee, which is made up of both members of the public as well as members of our board of directors. At the moment, we just had our most recent annual general meeting for the Lower Thames Valley Conservation Authority, and we were assigned, we were appointed members from Dutton Dunwich and Strathroy-Caradoc, which are two of the municipalities that are right bordering on our space. So it's fantastic to have their continued support. And as you might have noticed on my first slide, if you caught the 50s there, last year we celebrated our 50th anniversary. So a lot of people think that this is where the the Ska-Nah-Doht Village and Museum started. Here we have a photo of a gentleman laying the ceremonial first pole of the village. This is Irving Christian. But some of you might by now be wondering why I have a little red car sitting in front of me, and that is because Ska-Nah-Doht Village and Museum actually got our start in one of these. So in a 1966 Candy Apple Red Mustang with a 3-speed transmission and a V8 engine, we were first conceived of by Ron Watts, Brian Deller, our very own Glenn Stott, who is here today, as well as Graham McDonald, who was a superintendent for the Board of Education at the time. And it was during a road trip to a conference in 1969 that these gentlemen had the fantastic idea, in my opinion, to start a regional education center that focused on Indigenous heritage and history. In our area at the time, we did not really have a place for students to come and focus on the history of the Indigenous communities that were living directly in our area. And things like textbooks, school manuals and things like that were lacking in very like concerted regional history. So they opted to work together to come up with a location to fill that need within their community. So in 1970, these four gentlemen started investigating sites, having a lot of picnics from what I am told. And they were joined by Bill Dolson of Munsee Delaware Nation, Max Ireland of Oneida Nation of the Thames, and Irving Christian, who was the gentleman placing that pole there. And they eventually decided that of all the sites they liked, they visited, that what would be the Longwoods Road Conservation Area was probably the best place for their forthcoming center. And so work began to erect at first the Longhouse Village. So that began in 1971. A few years later, in 1973, if you were really good at math and were able to tell me that last year was 2023, that means that we opened in 1973. We celebrated our opening in the fall of 1973 when Bill Brady of CFPL London fame arrived by helicopter. So if you were a longtime Londoner, you might remember Bill Brady, but he arrived by helicopter to help MC the ceremonies that day. Simultaneously, as the Recreation Longhouse Village was being built, we received our 3 largest artifacts at Ska-Nah-Doht Village and Museum. We have everything that spans from the size of smaller than my pinky nail in corn cob kernels that have been carbonized to these fine things here. These are our heritage log cabins. So these were donated to us between the years of 1972 and 1973 while the first village was being constructed. And they were donated to us from the 3 local communities that are closest to our site. So that would be Chippewas of the Thames First Nation donated the cabin in the very, very back of the verdant green photo. That was donated to us by Chief Mashokaman on behalf of William Birch. And William Birch, the Birch home or the Chippewa cabin was built in 1820. And it was donated to us, as the name would imply, by the Chippewas of the Thames First Nation. And they are an Ojibwe community that established themselves along the banks of the Thames River in 1760. And they are a member of the Three Fires Confederacy. We talked a little bit about the Haudenosaunee in our last presentation. Here we have in the middle of this verdant photo, the Oneida cabin or the George cabin, as it is sometimes referred to. And that was donated to us by Bill George, who was a part of, who was a very large and outstanding member of his community. And this home was built in 1850. It was not originally built by the George family, but it was purchased by them for the cost of 2 cows. So what a steal, 2 cows. So this is their home here. And it was originally from Oneida Nation of the Thames, and it came from the Oneida settlement. Notice it did not say reserve. For us in our community here, the Oneida Nation of the Thames community, they have actually purchased the land that their community resides upon. It was not assigned to them by the government, so they purchased it in the 1840s. And the Haudenosaunee community, as the name implies, is a member of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, sometimes known as the 6 Nations or 5 Nations, depending on how far back in time you're referring to. And finally, in the very front, where we can see the ramp just towards the front part of the photo, the greener photo is the Logan and Dolson family's cabin. This was donated to us by Chief William B. Dolson. It was his boyhood home. William Dolson was one of the folks who helped with the originating of the museum. And it came from Munsee Delaware Nation. In Munsee, Delaware, they actually made an agreement with Chippewas of the Thames First Nation in order to section off a portion of land and establish their community there and their reserve. So they settled along the Thames River in the late 18th century at the close of the American Revolution, and they are a member of the Lenape Confederacy. While we had built our first recreation Longhouse Village at Longwoods and Ska-Nah-Doht and opened in 1973. It wasn't until a little bit later that some of the archaeological work that was done on site actually took place. And that was between the years 1979 and 1984. And that was done by Ron Williamson, who is the founder of one of the largest archaeological conservancy companies in Ontario, in Canada even, Archaeological Services, Inc. And this was when Ron Williamson was doing his PhD research. So during that time, he was doing his research on some of the sites there at Longwoods Road. I have a map here. If you are familiar with our space, this little orange box here is where Ska-Nah-Doht Museum and the Resource Center are. The green box is where the Recreation Village is, and the blue one is where the Heritage Log Cabins are today. And then the three circles are where three archaeological sites were found during that time period between 79 and 84. So we have the Kelly site here, which is where our main parking lot is today. You can sort of see the roadways in the background. There is the Yaworski site, named for one of the staff members who was working at Lowertons at the time. This is sort of where our picnic area is. And then down here in what's now these farm fields, this blue dot is the Burke Martel site, and it is named for the family who owns these two sets of farms right here along the roadway, just to upwards of our entrance and exit arrows on our map. So the Burke Martels have lived in this farm for decades and decades, and they have since purchased the farm beside, and this is all their farm field. They continue to actually find archaeological artifacts today when they're doing their plowing and putting in their crops. During our 50th anniversary celebrations this past summer, they actually came up to me and handed me another group of artifacts. They're like, oh, here, we found these summer. Here you go. Like, perfect, thanks. I will get on accessioning those and getting them all tucked away. So it was Ron Williamson who was the staff archaeologist at the time when these three sites were excavated. And they make up the large part of our collection at Ska-Nah-Doht Village and Museum. So we have about 300,000 artifacts. A lot of them came from these sites and then sites regional to our area. Over the years, after our sort of founding, we got all our archaeological work out of the way. And when the research was done, I'm just going to go backwards one slide here. The sites that they found, so this is the one where the parking lot is now. So there's the roadway today, just down at the bottom. They noticed that the archaeological sites that were found at Longwoods Road Conservation Area very much mirrored the types of site that was being replicated at our Longhouse Village, which was based off of another archaeological excavation at the time. And these sites are Haudenosaunee in origin. You can sort of see the outline of a longhouse here and some of the footprint of the palisade wall that would go around the Longhouse Village in the picture. So we're going to go forward. Over the years, we have helped host a number of powwows that were organized by our friends at Namrand Friendship Center. If you're very quick at reading, you might notice that sort of there are some questionable words used in here. This article is from the 1980s, so some of the terms that are used in reference to the communities that were taking part in that are not the same as what are used today. We jump forward a little bit more in time. We think back to one of the major projects that we've undertaken is the raising of the heritage log cabins, which we'll see a little bit more of later. But in 2007 and 2008, we actually had to raise the heritage log cabins out of the ground that they were sitting on, because if anyone is familiar with Strathroy-Caradoc, where we're located, we are right in a sand plain. If you put something on heavy on a sand plane and let it sit there for long enough, it eventually will start to sink. So our buildings had actually started to recess into the ground. So with the help of the Lower Thames Valley Conservation Foundation, we were able to get support from the Ontario Trillium Foundation to raise the 3 heritage log cabins and put them onto cement foundations, which you can really see best in the very corner of the bottom photo. And underneath, not only is there a foundation, now we also have some extra storage space for programming materials underneath those buildings, which to this day are still being used for education programs in classroom space. So these buildings are still used on the daily by our education team. Over the years, we have also been host to a number of film crew sites, a number of film crews who have joined us over the year on site. So this one here was in towards the early 2000s, late 1990s. And then the more colorful ones here on the side taking place at night actually took place just after I started at Longwoods Road Conservation Area as the curator in November of 2021. And we got very lucky with the weather that year. We still had some leaves on the trees, which were really what was the aim for the group that was out there with us. And this was the recording of DJ Shub, who was formerly of the Tribe Called Red music group. And he was coming to do a visual representation of his latest album at the time, War Club. And this would be a visual presentation of the critically acclaimed chart-topping Indigenous electronic album that he had put out, which, as they call it, is a message of protest and power. Forward one. This one is going to have a little video to the side here. This is just going to be a very short clip, teaser trailer of the presentation. The QR code on the side does link directly to CBC Gem, where you are able to watch the full presentation of DJ Shub's War Club online for free, which is fantastic. And you can get a couple glimpses of the village in the background. For me, as a new curator at the time, I had done a lot of public programming and been around for a lot of public community facing portions of museum work in the past. As a new curator, it was really exciting to be able to see some of our largest artifacts be used in this presentation, and to see the respect and get to see the joy on the performers' faces when they got to come and be in our space and share this place with those that were doing the filming, so that it could be shared with the community at large. So that was a very, very long day. I was there from stars in the sky until stars in the sky. So probably about 4 or 5 in the morning, the crew started to show up, which meant that I had to be there before them. And then I was there until the last folks left after all the garbage was cleaned up, probably at about 1 in the morning. So very, very long day, but it was just the most fantastic fun to be able to experience that with them. As you can imagine, with any sort of large structures, there are continual repairs that are needed at the village itself. A number of the types of materials that the Haudenosaunee would have used to create their longhouse villages in the past, we do not necessarily have access to. So instead of the proper types of bark, we often use basswood for the exterior cladding. So this is the frame of the longhouse, and this is going to get covered completely in bark. which you can see arriving on flatbed trailer in the one photo. And for us, a lot of the time, our repairs, we usually leave them in place for about 15 years or so, which if you talk to different archaeologists and just have discussions with community members from historical knowledge that has been shared with them and indigenous traditional knowledge that's been passed down through the ages, it probably is a little bit longer than the Haudenosaunee would have actually lived in that particular village. But for our purposes, 15 years is a great way to make the most out of the resources we're extracting from the environment. Being a conservation authority, it's something that we're very cognizant of, that we don't just keep taking and taking and taking resources from the environment around us in order to repair the village. So when students ask us during programming, is this exactly how the village would look like? Is this really the size of a longhouse? And I'd like to make the joke with them that, like, well, no, I probably shouldn't really call this a longhouse. I should call it a short house. It's probably about 100 meters, 100 feet too short in some cases, or the village should have a much larger expanse. But it's here for us to use our imagination, fill in the gaps of what the history books are not able to give us a real sense and appreciation of. So students are still really valuing that in-person experience that was really touted by our 4 educators in our Cherry Red Mustang. You guys mentioned it, the Battle of Longwoods, one of our favorite longstanding partnerships is with the Upper Thames Military Reenactment Society and the local reenactment community here in Southwestern Ontario. The Battle of Longwoods has been going on at our site since 1990 in one way or another, just a very short, small event at first in 1990, and then it grew larger just after that, sort of in 1991, and we started to see full weekend events. And this still takes place to this day on our site. We act as a host, as we have the capacity to have folks join us at Longwoods Road Conservation Area the first weekend of May each year. And so we're looking forward to having folks again with us there. So it's a little promo for all of you. If you are around the London area and you're available the first weekend of May, come join us. It is a fantastic time. And if you're here more in March, you're also welcome to join our reenactor friends at Battle Hill in March when they go for recognition of the battle itself. Now, these are all very well and good. There's lots of things happening at our space over the years, but as with any organization that has lived a long, thriving life, you do at some point have to start reflecting on where you're going next and what those next steps are. So for us, one of the largest reflections took place just in about 2017. And that was done in partnership, again, with the Lower Thames Valley Conservation Foundation. You'll hear their name come up a number of times. They are fantastic partners with us. And they were able to receive funding to have a visioning exercise done in 2017. So a lot of consultation was done with local community members, both Indigenous and settler communities, to find out what people thought was missing at Longwoods Road Conservation Area and Ska-Nah-Doht. This then led directly into a feasibility study in 2019. And these 2 studies came to us with an understanding of what demands the community had for our site. Do we have enough parking? Are the washrooms good enough? What types of facilities are they thinking that we need? A review of our programming and operations. Are people wanting large scale events? Are they wanting hikes? Are they wanting to see us do more school groups or day camps? As well as designs for a brand new facility. If we're going to continue to live in this space going forward, maybe we need to revitalize our space. that didn't take place at that point. Some capital and operations assessments, as well as a fund development strategy to help us sort of go into the next number of years and start thinking about how things are going to change. Now, you might notice 2019, the world stopped pretty soon after that. So there wasn't a lot of traction on the feasibility study at that point. It was sort of put on hold. Things were in that holding pattern as with most places. So we just had to sort of wait. Along the way, while we're doing our waiting and doing some work in the background that no one necessarily knows about at that point, we have our 50th anniversary. So along the way to 50 years, we rebranded in 1995 and 2008. Because if you, again, have really great eyes, you'll notice that in the name of the museum has changed over time. So down here in the bottom, it says Ska-Nah-Doht Village. We no longer use the term Iroquoian to refer to the community who had Longhouse villages at Longwoods Road Conservation Area. The correct term would be Haudenosaunee, in order to respect the fact that Iroquoian is a name that was assigned to the Haudenosaunee community or the Six Nations by settlers and colonial powers that be. So we use the term Haudenosaunee, which is the term that those communities use to refer to themselves. As well as in other times in our history, other words were used. So needing to think about that, we then rebranded again in 2008 to be Ska-Nah-Doht Village and Museum, which is down here in the corner is our sort of current logo with the white pine and the two corn husk dolls to represent connection to both each other and the environment. So as we reach 50 years, we started to reflect again on, now that things are starting to open up, what do we need to do? We think that we've started to really outgrow the current space that we've had. Our museum opened, the physical indoor section of it opened the year after the village in 1974. It has served us very well for a very long time, but there are a lot of issues with it. So we decided to look at those items of interest and areas in our current 5-year strategic plan, which I don't know how we're already halfway through. Where those 2 years went, I don't know. But we pulled out our 5-year strategic plan. And what really came of our discussions was that not only do we need to think about, is our space right for us, but what is our current function? Who are we serving? What is our community looking for? And once again, falling back onto some of the work that was done in that 2017 visioning project, but also continuing those conversations with our stakeholders, the teachers, the students, the Indigenous community members who are making use of our spaces. So through our strategic plan, we came up with a number of goals and aspirations for ourselves of what we wanted our museum to continue to be a voice for. And that was things like community building, connectivity, wellness, inspiration. We wanted to be a place where, though we want people to feel comfortable coming to us and being a place that they feel at home, we also wanted to be a place where difficult conversations couldn't be had. There are a lot of things that have been brushed under the rug over the years, but we really need to address them going forward if we're wanting to build sustainable, continued, healthy relationships with all members of our community. So, there are particularly 7 areas of attention that we recognized in our 5-year strategic plan that we needed to really look for if we wanted to take action on these goals and aspirations. So first would be recovery from COVID-19. As with everyone, everything completely shifted. How do we come out of this? Well, this is a fresh start, a break. Where do we go? Revitalizing our public visitation and booked programs. we had for a very long time had a tremendous support from our local schools, from London all the way to Windsor, and people were coming for the same things over and over again. We get these same requests each year, but are those programs actually meeting the needs of those students? Or are teachers coming for the nostalgia and the tradition of that, even though it might still be meeting their curriculum needs? What is the actual physical and emotional need of the students that are coming here? How are we meeting that? Doing some infrastructure and structural improvements to our space. Again, our building was 49 years old. It was time, it needed some love. Thinking about our space use, as I mentioned, we've been using our heritage log cabins as classroom spaces, funding diversification, as well as further community consultation, but more importantly, truth and reconciliation. So I'm just going to take a second to put out a note about truth and reconciliation here. I clearly am a member of the settler community. I come to Ska-Nah-Doht Village and Museum with a background in archaeology and museums. That is the lens that I am able to share, whereas other members of our staff, like Thomas, who's down here, he is our community educator. He is of Haudenosaunee and Anishinaabe descent. And so he comes to our teachings and our lessons with a very different lens and a different perspective than I can offer. But for each of us, especially being a museum of our particular nature, one that is not run by a municipality, it is not run by a government organization, but one that is focused very particularly on relationship building, Indigenous heritage, as well as conservation, because we are part of a conservation authority. We're able to have some conversations that other museums might not necessarily be able to have, especially ones that are historical in nature. So I just would like everyone to take a second to reflect on the fact that each of us has a responsibility to use our words and our actions to inspire others to do good with their words and their actions. And that reconciliation is not a spectator sport, or tongue-tied. Reconciliation is not a spectator sport. We must take good action, and we need to take that action when we are called upon to do it, not when it is comfortable for us, but when it is asked of us. And so as we go into our next 50 years, that is something that as a museum, we're very cognizant of, that there are requests of us from local community that we need to be paying attention to. In order to make sure that we are able to meet those needs and to address those calls to action and those 7 areas of attention, we did a lot of brainstorming as a staff team and with a number of community groups that we work with to think about how are we going to get there? What is the first step? And it became very clear that if we did not have a nice, whole, healthy place to do this work, we were not going to be able to provide the inspiration and make the change that we were wanting to see going forward. So we indicated particularly 4 different things in underneath infrastructure and space change improvements. So things like a redesign of our exhibits and changes to our space use strategy, accessibility, revitalization of our physical building, as well as collection storage. So obviously these are things that play into a lot of museums. If you are involved with a small local museum, you know that these are the continual issues that we all have, but sometimes they get pushed to the back burner in favor of other things. And we really took a deep dive into like, okay, how are we going to make positive change? And we knew that we had to address these things if we wanted to do that. So our first big project was going to be our heritage cabin revitalization project. When I arrived at Ska-Nah-Doht, our largest buildings, our largest artifacts, 2 of them were in dire need of help and some love. So this is the back of the Munsee Delaware cabin. after I had them remove the wood accessibility ramp. So they had put in wooden accessibility ramps on the Muncie Delaware cabin as well as the Oneida cabin, with the intentions of making those spaces accessible to community members. But the way that they were put on, and given that we are in that sand plane, the angle of those ramps continued to shift, and they were eventually starting to divert water back onto the building, causing a lot of rot and decay. So one of the first things that I had them do once I got there was just remove those entirely. Like, yes, we need to have our buildings be accessible, but we need to fix this building before, because if we do not take care of this building, it will be gone. This is our largest artifact. We are stewards of this cultural heritage on behalf of the communities that these buildings come from. This is not showing a tremendous amount of respect. We need to fix this. So they're like, perfect. You want to do this? Let's go. So we got support from the Government of Canada's Tourism Relief Fund through Ontario Southwest. So we like to thank them first and foremost for giving us some funds to take care of some operational and capital projects that most times grants do not allow for. So we replaced these logs here with the support of Luxurious from Rodney, very fun name, and then proceeded to put on weather-resistant ramps at all 3 cabins. So not just the 2 that they were at previously, and that was done with the support of motion. And you'll notice there is a gap between the building and the ramp. If you ever are thinking of doing any work and your home happens to be heritage, I urge you, please leave at least a foot gap between your building and any work you're doing, be it a garden, a ramp, any sort of thing. Leave some space, leave some breathing room, because otherwise things like this can happen. In addition to those log replacements, we also recognize that we were not doing our part in sharing the heritage of those buildings in a way that is accessible and that recognizes the heritage of those spaces. So part of the project was to create new interpretive panels for those buildings. So each one has the history of that building in English, and then the center panel is the history of that cabin in the language of the nation that it originated from, paired with a piece of artwork from an artist from that nation as well. So that was done with us with the support of, for the Oneida cabin, the Oneida Language and Cultural Center, and their knowledge keepers. They were the ones who were able to translate for us. And then Shanoa Q. Simon provided us the artwork. For Muncie Delaware Nation, we had Ian McCallum, who helps head up their language and history team, helped with the translation, and then Gig Fisher provided us the painting. It was a lovely day. Gig contacts me. He's like, I saw your call for a painting. I have the painting. And he comes the next day. He's like, I painted this, and then I saw your call. And I was like, I then knew that this is why I had painted this yesterday. So it was just a very touching moment. And then for Chippewas of the Thames First Nation, Monty McGahee translated the history into Anishinaabemowin, and then the artwork was provided to us by Mishkona Wabo-Minidook. And this is a representation of a jingle dress dancer in red because of recognition for murdered and missing Indigenous women, girls, and Two-Spirit peoples. Our exhibits, when I arrived at Ska-Nah-Doht, a number of them have been in place for a very long time, very popular, some of them, but there was this need for us to change how we were going to go about presenting those pieces of information going forward. So as a heritage site, but also one that deals with conservation, there had been sort of a disconnect between what was being presented on the history side and what was being presented on the conservation side. And we are now, as part of our education team's strategic goals going forward, is to have a further integration of Indigenous traditional knowledge with conservation practices, and having a more holistic view of the information that we're presenting. So including things like language pieces, keywords in the languages of the communities that we serve and we represent, as well as sharing traditional knowledge alongside conservation pieces going forward, with the hopes that we will continue to update and revitalize our content as we go forward with some of the projects we're going to come up to next, but also in the years to come, doing a lot more community involved exhibit creation with groups like Standing Stone and Antler River, which are the two elementary schools on two of the nations that are closest to us, Oneida and Chippewas of the Tex. Accessibility, another huge project for most people at the moment as we go towards the 2025 benchmark for Ontarians with Disabilities Act. So here we have some volunteers from Montessori School in London, helping us to resurface a number of our accessible trails, which also provide information about some of the tree species that are along the way, as well as we've installed things like push buttons at the museum. We're doing more digital versions of our exhibit so that those who either are not able to get themselves to the village or the museum have access to those in a digital format. But those who also need to make use of screen reader technologies have that option. And rather excitingly, if you've been to the museum, you know, as our 1970s building, we are on 3 floors. And if you have any sort of accessibility consideration for mobility, you cannot get to the upper floor, which is offices, and you cannot get to the lower floor, which was our hands-on room. So by this time next year, the end of March 2025, we will be installing a limited use, limited application elevator. So very exciting. But if anyone's been to Longwoods recently, you might have noticed that there is a lot of construction going on, and that is because our major project at the moment, coming as a direct result of consultation from the 3 Indigenous communities closest to us, as well as a little further afield, Moravian Town, the Delaware at Moravian Town. We are in the process of adding a 2,000-foot extension to the museum. So the pictures of the rendering of the room, those are what our new hall is going to sort of look like. These are early renderings. Some of the colors and things are not accurate any longer. But the old portion of the museum, this is the back side. There should be lots of trees here, but that's not good for rendering for architects. So they've taken them away. I assure you, there are still trees there in our conservation area. So this is the back of our building. These are all brand new windows already. The whole outside portion of the old building is going to be reclad in new material. That should last a little bit longer. We've gotten a new roof. We're getting a new septic system, all kinds of stuff. We've got lots of stuff going on. But more importantly, we're going on through this endeavor of creating this 2,000 square foot addition, which is funded in part by the Government of Canada through the Federal Economic Development Agency and the Canada Community Revitalization Fund. And actually, our funding for that needs to be spent by the end of this month. So the majority of construction is already done. So if you were there last year for Battle of Longwoods or in the spring, all the way up to October, beginning of October, you never would know. I went away on vacation October 13th. I came back, there was holes in the ground. There were buildings being erected. I was like, it's been 2 weeks. What's happened here? So they're making really great progress. All of the windows in the addition have been added already. So all the superstructure is there. It's just sort of the inside, the guts of the building is left. So the intention with building this extension, like, okay, yeah, fine, you're gonna build this space, but why bother? Like, it's just a big empty room. We want to be more than a museum. We need to be a place that is for the community, by the community. And to do that, we are going to revitalize our existing structure, So this section with the Tyvek, the prettiest Tyvek in all the world, with our brand new windows and our extension here. I'm really sorry because all of our reenactor friends, Anne's not here, but Anne's hands-on room is gone. So we used to have a hands-on room in our basement. You can sort of see there is some painting of some clouds up here. It's gone. It's going to be a new kitchen, a new accessible washroom, a walkthrough, and then this garage door is actually going to be the pass-through into the hall because it's going to be a full catering kitchen. As community members from the 3 local Indigenous communities pointed out to us, we really, really, really need a shared community space where we can have catering done that is not at one of the particular nations. We need sort of this common neutral space where we can come and have community discussions as the CMO. And they've told us forever that Longwoods is their shared space. They all feel very connected and tied to this space. So they wanted to have a room where they could come and do their work together. So we're building it. They said they want it, it's coming. We are going to be also using that space as new classroom space. If anyone noticed, there's no snow this year. We are in a time of a lot of environmental change. Our conservation area is very rural. Anytime we get high winds over 35, kids have to go out off the trails. Anytime there's lots of rain, off the trails. Thunderstorms, off the trails. Too much snow, off the trails. So the cabins are great for that, but you can't have everybody all together. And the cabins are also small, they're cold. If we don't have a fire lit in them, there's not climate control. So the extension will also act as a new education space for us. We are going to be building some new purpose-built artifact storage. Fantastic. As with all small museums, most of our collection is housed in a very small room with not the ideal conditions that we would want them to be having. Like, we make it work. It's fantastic, but it's not at the museum. It makes it very difficult to do some of the work that we need to do because you can either be one place or the other. And then finally, accessibility. I mentioned the Lula lift, but also the trail resurfacing, a further additional accessible washroom, things like that. They're all going into this space so that all members of our community can make use of it and we can be that place for everyone instead of just hoping. So here, again, the whole intention is for us to be doing this because of desire for local community, settler, and Indigenous to promote the continued community engagement and vitality of conservation education, but also the appreciation of Indigenous traditional knowledge, Indigenous life stories today and in the past, and to get us towards better truth and reconciliation. So we are currently undertaking a very big project. So the $750,000 here is that grant from the government of Canada that is getting us the extension. This $100,000 is towards the elevator, again, from the government of Canada, but through enabling accessibility. The rest of it is on us. So we are working with the Lower Thames Valley Conservation Foundation. Geez, those guys do a lot of stuff for us. So they are working with us to do this capital campaign to raise the funds for our extension. The Conservation Authority and our board have already said, regardless of how funding goes and fundraising, we're having this extension. So it's already built. We're on the hook. We are going to be doing this regardless because we think it's important. It's that second section, the administrative offices, which I would love to have, because then I can get my built office out of a space that could be display space and be actively used by the public and have a better place for the artifacts. That would be gold. Just brilliant for me. But even if we don't get there, which we will, we're going to at least be able to have this common space to help us get further towards truth and reconciliation, and to keep sharing a love of the environment and creating these next stewards for our community. So I just want to leave you very briefly with my why. People often ask me, Alison, why are you here? Why is this important to you? As I mentioned, studied archaeology. I did my master's research on how archaeological site museums present history to the public. So that's exactly what Ska-Nah-Doht does. So that's a big check mark for me. But more importantly, it has to do with Ska-Nah-Doht and our partners like the Upper Thames Military Reenactment Society, the Conservation Foundation, our parent, the Lower Thames Valley Conservation Authority, their desire for continued lifelong learning and that inspiration of connectivity within the community. And so I'll leave you with two very quick stories. One, everyone probably remembers not too long ago, all those babies were found at Kamloops. I had a rather salient conversation from my mother with her. She was asking me, she's like, how did I not know about this? We lived in Sault Ste. Marie all of my life. She's from Southern Ontario, so she didn't grow up in the Sault. But I looked at her and I asked her, I'm like, did you know that where you used to bring me for piano lessons was actually on the grounds of a residential school? And she was flabbergasted. She had no idea. I followed that up with, you know where cousin Nicole went to school? All the forest behind it, that's where the graves are. All of the children in that community knew. They knew where they were, but my mom had no idea. They've since renamed parts of that university, Algoma University, in recognition of those children, and that is the Shinwalk Hall at Algoma, and there's a lot of great research being done and a lot of good work being done there. But also something a little bit closer to home here. Who remembers talking about Attawapiskat in the past? How many of you know that Oneida Nation of the Thames has been without clean water since 2019? How many of you know that Munsee Delaware Nation and Chippewas of the Thames First Nation were not far behind in 2021? You're ahead of the curve, I'll tell you that. So there's a lot of work that needs to be done on learning about what actual respect, reciprocity, and recognition are. And my why is because I think that we're the place to do it. Not only are we a place to learn about the past, we have to be a place to learn about the future.
Any questions?
You mentioned you change up the physical structures every 14 years or so.
Yeah, or when necessary, but it generally ends up being about like 10 to 15 years or so. The palisade wall generally is about 15 years. You can actually go into the village, you'll look and see, and you'll be like, okay, that's the 15-year section, because you can tell that from the erosion on the palisade section. So we'll do a little section, and then the next year we'll do another little section, and then next year.
To follow up, the contemporary community that site is based off of, how often would they have moved? Because my understanding is they're semi-permanent, and how often would they have moved, and why would they have moved?
Yeah, so there are many different versions of Longhouse villages. Not only do the Haudenosaunee have a tradition of the Longhouse, but also the Lenape also have a version of the Longhouse that their communities would use. Munsee Delaware Nation actually has a healing Longhouse on their site, which I could not tell you where it is. I'm not part of the community, and that I'm going to keep it that way. That I don't know. It's not my place. But one of the things that would have been done is relationship building with the land that the community was living on. So there would be a recognition of, are the animals still here in the same sort of population capacity? Is the land still producing the Three Sisters as readily as it had been? Is there erosion taking place? Are we having issues with deforestation? And if they were starting to recognize those things and they didn't think that the community would be able to sustain themselves there if they were to be there in another generation, and if they had like left and they couldn't, it wouldn't be healthy for those folks who were coming after them, they would leave. They would move, probably sometimes like 100 kilometers, sometimes more. And so they would move from place to place. At our site, we had the 3 archaeological sites, again, named after colonial folks, but those 3 sites were used at separate times between 800 Common Era and 1200 Common Era, and they were inhabited individually at different times, but all of them around that point. And most likely why I think anyway, and why a number of archaeologists that I've spoken with posit that they use that space over and over again is because we have 2 ravine systems in our conservation area, which 1,000 years ago would have been full rivers. Now they're just little tiny streams, because since colonization, we've filled in marshes, we've built dams and hydroelectric stations, and we don't like the flooding. But they would have been full rivers. And this actually, this picture with me and all of these children who are taller than I am. Sort of just behind this crop of trees here, we have a birch grove, and a ravine system sort of runs this way through behind us. And then on the other side, there's another ravine system sort of on this side of the conservation area that sort of meet up where the Jaworski site was, which was where our picnic area is. There's sort of a connection of the 2 river systems there. So as soon as the communities were starting to see any sort of negative, like long-term negative impact on the environment that was around them, they would leave so that they would be able to come back to this place in the future, and it would still be a healthy, sustainable location.
Thanks.
You were saying earlier on the topic of longhouses, that you use basswood bark to cover the longhouse, and you said something about that was the original material they would use. So you know what they would have used. Alison, can you?
Yeah. So the question was, what I had mentioned that the longhouses we tend to use basswood at this point. That's what our most recent supplier was able to give us access to. But what was used in the past, given our climate here in southwestern Ontario, preservation is not the best. The best sort of guess is that things like elm probably would have been used. But we are still using cedar to make the posts of the longhouse and the palisade wall. Glenn, do you know?
Yeah, Alison, initially, I think that what every 10, 12 years we had to replace the elm bark that originally was on it with elm bark. We used to go to Ottawa.
Yeah.
The Ottawa Valley area, and they supplied us with elm bark. Well, that's supply dried up. So that's why I think we're working on other things for basswood.
Yeah. So for those who are online, I have my biggest critic here, who's also like my best friend, Glenn Stott, who's one of our founders, is in the audience listening. And he was mentioning that when the original village was built, it was elmwood that they had been using. And Glenn mentioned that supply dried up, which is funny because then we had another supply, and then we went back to another supply that was in Ottawa, and that's dried up again. And most recently, the folks who had been providing us with the cedar posts, who live outside of Arkona, those 2 gentlemen retired. So we were really lucky that they both sources told us in advance, so we were able to get any sort of extra because they're trying to sell off their stock. So we hoarded it away for the next little while, so we're okay for a little bit. We can hold off. A lot of different places are starting to move to the use of like plasticized bark looking material. It's not great. Being a conservation area, we're really trying to like hold off on doing that as much as we can. And so we sort of made that decision that for as long as viably possible, we are going to be doing as traditional as possible. So even though we will use things like wire and nails in our village for health and safety reasons, you know, the school board tells me I can't have the kids go in if it's not structurally sound. For some reason, but every day I try to lose kids in the maze and it just doesn't work. So I guess the teachers are happy about that. But we're going to keep doing it as best we can to be as realistic as possible while still being respectful of the fact that we can't be using the same amount of material to make a full-scale village since we're not actually living there.
Do you deal with the Crawford Lake Longhouse Village also? Like, do you cooperate with them or share information?
So the question was if we have relationships with Crawford Lake. If anyone doesn't know, Crawford Lake also has a recreation Longhouse Village. There has been relationships in the past, given that we've been working more primarily on like this extension thing the last 3 years since I've been there. And my main concern was trying to get the cabins fixed. We are sort of been in a holding pattern in the village. There's a lot of work that needs to be done there now because there was this gap during COVID. So the hope is that now as everybody's starting to ramp up again, people aren't furloughed or on leave and everyone's sort of getting back into the swing of things, that we'll be able to have these sort of conversations with other folks with reproduction villages. The group that we had probably the closest relationship with is the Museum of Ontario Archaeology here in London, who also had a recreation at a Haudenosaunee village with longhouses. But since I worked there, those longhouses have come down in favor of a virtual reality version of the longhouses, which is lovely. It's fantastic work, but it's not the same, right? You don't get the same feeling, the same appreciation of like the work and the community that would be involved in building a village like that.
What are your visitation demographics?
So we have our site, we have a lot of multi-generational visits during the summer, but primarily during this time of the year, it's school kids. I think in the month of February, outside of school kids and Boy Scouts, Girl Guide groups that we've seen on the weekend, I've seen maybe 15-20 people come into the museum proper itself. We've not been able to really promote hours at this point because we're in construction and we don't know what day we're gonna have to close our doors because they need to put conduit above our heads and be up on tall things. But our winter sort of visitation is a lot of hikers who are just coming in to say hello, get their passes, chit chat, enjoy with us. And then it's more during the summer. We see folks from between 30 to 40 countries each year. And that's primarily between May and the Canadian Thanksgiving weekend in October.
So I just have one final question. There are a lot of obviously history-minded people here. So the question I would ask is, as you're working through this process, how can we support? What can we do?
Yeah, so the question for those online is, how can folks get involved with our major project? You guys saw that dollar figure, it astounds me and keeps me awake at night. But one of the ways that you can get involved and support us is through reaching out to the Lower Thames Valley Conservation Foundation. They're the ones who are doing the large part of the capital campaign proper. So if you were to say, go to the Lower Thames Valley Conservation Authority webpage, there would be a link to the foundation, or you can search in Google Lower Thames Valley Conservation Foundation. They're also on Facebook and Instagram. at LTVCF, which is just one off of the authority, which is an A instead. So we often get our wires crossed by folks, but they're doing a lot of really great work. They're always looking for new ideas of people to reach out to. We've had our first capstone donation from Ron Williamson. So if you remember at the beginning of my presentation, I mentioned Ron, who did his PhD work and was the staff archaeologist. He gave us a capstone gift at our 50th anniversary. He came up and told us, he's like, we're gonna make this happen. We're working really hard and diligently to raise those funds. So again, visit the Lower Thames Valley Conservation Foundation. They have information about what phases we have. There are 3 phases, even though we don't call them 1, 2, 3. There's 1, there's 1B, which is the lift, and 2, which is the second portion of the extension. But they'll have all of the information that folks could need.
Thank you so much on behalf of everybody here. Token of our appreciation, but thank you so much.
Just shout out to Glenn. He couldn't bring me the big car, but he brought me a little one.
So just a few comments to wrap this up. What a great day. Thank you, Alison. That was a wonderful way to close out our day. I think we had 4 great presenters, really good topics, fascinating day. We're not quite done yet for those that can join us at 4:30 in the River Cafe. So top of the stairs or at the elevator in the corner to the left. Beautiful restaurant. So we'll have some hors d'oeuvres there. Those are provided by us. If you want a drink, that's provided by you. So those of you that have been watching us online, then hopefully you enjoyed your day and you can have yourself an adult beverage and toast us and what we pulled off. As we leave here, the room's going to be closed up. So if you're going to the reception, make sure you take all your belongings with you. We'll do a sweep, making sure the room's clear, but please take your belongings with you. Once again, want to thank our sponsors. So the primary sponsor, Upper Thames Military Reenactment Society. It's taken me a while to get that, but Alison, you nail it every time. So I guess you truly are a partner with them, eh? Mark Dickerson and your dental practice, really appreciate that. All our donors, you know, in the lead up to the conference, but over the past few years since we started doing all this online activity, it's made all of this possible. Also want to recognize the committee. As I said at the beginning of the day, Chris and I are the more visible aspects of this, but you know, here with us today, we have Glenn Stott, Brad Stott, Tom Ross, Mark Dickerson, and with us all day online has been Susan Spencer. So thank you to all our committee members. And then thank you to Chris. So he's kind of my wingman in a lot of the stuff, the guy that grits his teeth every time I say I have an idea. And then he helps make these happen. So on behalf of the team at the History Symposium, thank you so much for your support, both in person, online, and then hope we can continue to socialize a little bit at the reception. So thank you very much.